Index podcast is brought to you by our staking partner, Marinade Finance. Their latest release, Marinade Select, offers a smarter way to stake, featuring a curated set of high-performing mid-size validators handpicked for yield, professionalism, and their role in making Solana faster and more resilient. Learn more and start staking at marinade.finance. Hey everybody, and welcome to The Index. I'm your host, Alex Kahaya, and today I've got Rick and Dan on the show from Arbitrum Gaming, and really appreciate you guys being here. Excited to learn more about what you're doing. My understanding is this is like kind of a spin out from the Arbitrum DAO or somehow supported, but I'd love to learn more about that. But before we do, I just kind of want to understand, why are you guys here building what you're building? Like, what gets you out of bed every day in the morning to do what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in real quick. I've always been a pretty chaotic person, even though I come from like consulting background. Like, new territory always excites me, and I barely missed just according to my age group, like the .com boom in terms of like startups. So I'm like looking at, while I was working consulting, like what's brand new and exciting, and the whole idea of like decentralized computing was super interesting. So back in like 2018, 2019, started like researching, taking a look at the white paper for Satoshi, all that kind of stuff, and then building in the space, and started building just, decentralized applications, since then up until 2024. And one of the untouched territories that hadn't really broken into the, like, not even mass market, but like the first layer of interest into crypto really was gaming. And I'm a lifetime gamer, like was obsessed with RuneScape, Neopets, Guild Wars, you name it. I probably spent too many hours on it. And I do believe that there's a lot of like synergy between those two categories. The idea of like user created content, the idea of empowering like, different brands and publishers to be able to collaborate within a verified network. There's a lot of cool use cases. It's all theory though. And for me, like, because it's theory, it got me really excited about the space. And the DAO at that time was really, really, in its nascent stages. They were trying to figure out like what makes sense to invest in, what makes sense to build programs around. And at that time, DeFi was the focus. And for many reasons, right? Like Arbitrum as a network was known to be like a GeFi hub. But gaming was kind of just like on the sidelines. It didn't really have much programming around it. And so I was helping some builders in the space from Treasure DAO and a bunch of other gaming startups just figure out like what would be a program that makes sense for the DAO and also for the gaming community and builders, right? So what started out as a tiny grants program just to kickstart some startups became a larger kind of initiative that would address kind of the main pain points of game builders from the ground up. Both in terms of the time of support needed to get a game from 0 to X, but also to kind of address the fact that, games don't really want to spend a ton of gas fees and the stuff that was driving like quote unquote value for networks. And so there had to be other ways of return. So grants programs didn't necessarily make the most sense by itself. Investments became more and more of a discussion, and then it became a question of how do we make the investments fit a Web3 and gaming environment. And at that time, I think I ran into Rick at a conference and started brainstorming on how to make this thing happen. And when we did stand the program up, I'm like, man, gaming, Web3, pre kind of product market fit, it just excited me because I'm always about seeing whether experiment can work or not, and do have a lot of conviction it will. And it was just about how I can, support it and make something happen.
Right. Yeah. I can jump in. I mean, I'll try to be concise in this answer, but, I don't have much else to add, than what Dan just, suggested. But, I think, I've been, I guess, as like a retail investor, pretty interested in crypto since around 2015, I would say. And, I had worked in gaming previously, and for me, this watching the canvas of gaming evolve over the last 2 decades, and, my gaming experience, my favorite games are like pretty old school, like LucasArts, role playing or kind of narrative driven games. Like Monkey Island's my favorite game of all time. Shout out to Craig Derrick if you're listening to this. But when I met Dan, I had previously launched my last startup on Arbitrum. It was a consumer fintech product, really tackling a lot of the UX inefficiencies in Web3, specifically in kind of the self-custodial wallet space. And gaming as it existed, like the previous vintage of gaming, I had always wished, gosh, I wish it would evolve a lot faster. Meaning, I wasn't seeing the most sustainable products come to market. They felt a bit extractive. But then, working with Dan at the very earliest stages and the working group that we had, I realized that the entire group had this vision for a higher fidelity future for Web3 entertainment in general, not just games. And Arbitrum really was the right place. Well-capitalized initiative from the DAO. And I felt just the consensus was, we can really help fuel and contribute to this like higher fidelity future. And I think that's what really sucked us in. And obviously something of this magnitude coming from the DAO, I thought it made a pretty strong signal, a really strong statement. It's not an insignificant amount of funding. And then we also have cross Arbitrum partners and off-chain labs, and it creates a really interesting suite of resources that we can offer to developers coming through this new venture, this unconventional venture model. And in general, I always knew that I would work in venture. And so, romanticizing the entrepreneurial journey my whole life, now I'm able to interface with, founders at the earliest stages. And there's nothing more activating than that. So
I find it super interesting, and I grew up playing video games too. I'm not like an active gamer now, but I did grow up playing games. And my partner Shawnee, who is our producer and my partner in the show, used to run marketing for Bandai Media, which is a pretty big gaming studio. So we have some chops there, and it's interesting because a big part of our audience, I mean, basically everybody, if you look at our analytics on YouTube, got 120,000 subs, and most of them are male in their 30s that like gaming. I don't know why. Like, we don't even talk about games that much, but they like gaming. And I think maybe that's just the overlap of early adopters for crypto and NFTs and things like that. And AI is like our gamers. And so we've actually been thinking about, because we've mostly survived off sponsorship revenue today in self-funded as well. And so we've been thinking about like spinning up a game or a game studio as a way to make money that's like more scalable and more in our control, because sponsors come and go. And, but I just don't know anything about that. I my partner does, but I'd be curious to hear from you guys. Like, what does it take? Like when you're talking to these entrepreneurs that are game developers, what does it take to go to market and succeed? And why crypto? Like, what are the, if I was going to build a game today, what should I because I've got a great distribution channel for something like that. What should I ship, and why does it need crypto? Not necessarily even specifically Arbitrum, just in general, and how would I structure that?
I have some initial thoughts. One, keep us posted if that's a direction you are interested in pursuing. Obviously, you have such distribution and kind of a thriving community. I think that can only help. I'll take a shot at it and just highlight a couple of things that came to mind when you were talking, and then I'll let Dan go. But I think, one unique aspect that we look for when we talk to early stage founders, whether it's a like prominent builder that has shipped successful products in a Web2 capacity, or an indie developer that usually are on the cusp of innovation, coming up with the most wildest ideas. And when they work, it's truly a breakthrough. But I think, a bottoms up approach, really understanding what your community wants and needs. And that, that user centric approach, I think that's, you always start with the needs of the user. And I'll also say that, there is kind of this emerging player archetype that is financially incentivized to some degree, really understanding those motivations, but how do you package it and build an enduring brand around it? And then when introducing blockchain features or Web3, it's how do you introduce a additive feature or integrate blockchain that it doesn't feel extractive? And the UX complexity is one thing, but it's also about telegraphing trust. Building a great game or a great experience, and putting, some type of, something with a lot of complexity right in front of the user at the very start can really compromise trust. And I think that you really need to kind of gauge the pulse of the user base. What is their like Web3 competency? And then you can kind of design when to introduce, blockchain features or whatever your direction is. So just some quick thoughts, but.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about you, Dan? Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed over time, right? Like I mentioned, over the last probably like 5-6 years, there's been a ton of folks that have like attempted to find different angles to attack gaming and crypto. And a lot of it kind of like rode with the market, right? Like when everything was just super frothy and every token was going well and people were like, oh man, like especially devs that in their world, fundraising sucks. They want to build great games. They don't want to talk to a bunch of publishers and negotiate a bunch of things. It's like, wow, if I can do crowdfunding in a way that's way easier and reach markets across the world, like why not launch a token? Well, that's also proven to hinder a lot of teams, right? When they're able to raise a ton of money and not be held accountable by more institutional folks and stuff like that, the products tend to be a little bit worse. So now we're at the point where it's like, and we encourage builders to think about this all the time. It's like the core loop is ultimately what matters about a game. And then features that are built on top that offer benefits that are attached to crypto could make sense, but try to figure that out within your core game loop. Don't try to just say it's a crypto game for the sake of it and just have like a token out there or something else. Like that automatically changes the incentives of both the game, users and yourself. So I think there's a few interesting things. I think, like I mentioned, like the user created content, there are a lot of interesting ways to kind of add collaborative elements based on blockchain to verify like who's making what, how do you want to license things, how do you want to like share content and stuff like that. That's one of the most exciting things for myself is like being able to see that come to light potentially. But at the core, I think the fundamental aspects of why crypto has strengths applies to gaming, right? The fact that you can have a ledger kind of contain information and have it decentralized so that nobody can just change it and make it super mutable applies to gaming too, whether it's items or currency or anything else. And I think starting from there, once you have the game loop is a great place. And, Rick and I spent a lot of time consulting with Porcos and other founders that are even in our portfolio, just like letting them know like, hey, you've got a great background. You built X, Y, Z in Web 2. Focus on that experience and make the experience great. And then you can layer on crypto to enhance the experience, right? But we don't really expect you to come out with some game-changing crypto narrative by itself without a great loop.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I have somewhat of a thesis too here, and that is, I think people try to overcomplicate things, just generally speaking. And this is common of like every entrepreneur or developer. They have these ideas and they like really overbuild and over-engineer. And especially with games, it's such a creative pursuit. I mean, it's art, right? It's all your ideas, and you're inventing worlds and game mechanics and all this stuff. And so it can get like out of control. And so when I was thinking about what we might do, I was thinking, what's the simplest thing that's already proven that I don't need to reinvent the wheel? And then how can I insert DeFi mechanics into it and generate revenue that way? And so my basic idea was to starting out, just copy super addicting games that the licenses are public now, like Snake. Like you don't have to license that. You don't have to pay for anything like that. Maybe some kind of not Tetris, things like that. Flappy Birds, like just you can sort of copy some of these games in ways that either get around the IP issues, or they're already like old enough that the IP issues don't matter anymore. And I think there are some of those. Maybe you guys have ideas. And then I was thinking about with some of these addicting games, they all have leaderboards.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you remember when Flappy Birds came out and people were just like smashing that Flappy Bird button, on their phones? You could see them like walking around in the street, just like playing that game. And they're all just doing it for the leaderboard. What if you just deposited like 0.2 Sol, or like $10 or 50 cents even? And at the end of the week or at the end of a time period, that the winner, the top scorer, got like most of the pot, and the second place one got some, and like third place got their money back or something like that. I bet that would be super addicting. And lots of people would play it. And the cool thing is, if you get that at scale, you can get yield. Like the game developer can just like automatically deposit stuff in Camino if you were doing this on Solana, right? Or just USDC and generate some yield and get some free money that way, so to speak. And it doesn't cost the users anything. And then you can take like a small percentage of the pot every game. That was my initial idea, because I was like, man, this is like, I don't have to come up with a game here. I can just like copy something we all know and love. And
Alex, you should start an incubator. Just like every one of those ideas has a portco we're either working with or someone that's pitched us. And now it's all about execution.
Yeah, you're kind of speaking. Those are all great thoughts. I definitely encourage you to pursue it. It's a good segue into a couple of other topics, but you mentioned that there's the process and the ability to develop a game, given that there's so much IP out there. And like some of the games that you mentioned, people already intuitively know how to play. There's already a built-in audience, including the one that you have for this podcast. And I think, you mentioned some like really interesting behavioral traits with Flappy Birds, for example. If there is a financial incentive to, tap that button, I think it starts to kind of bleed into this, fintech paradigms needing to change, and how do we incentivize everyday behavior, including playing games. I think it's something like 74% of Gen Z plays up to 2 to 3 hours a day of games.
Nuts.
And,
I know how I feel about that.
Well, I'll share some other stats with you if you're really interested.
The game that I was talking to the founder of Moonwalk Fitness, that's on Solana, and I like that, because that is super positive, right? Is this gamification of fitness, and I like that a lot. So for me, that's like one reason not to do the idea is that I just said, because it doesn't like what is the good it's doing, that's kind of, and I get that it's entertainment and people play games just for the purity of entertainment, but you don't want to create something. I don't want to create something that's like totally unhealthy, So I have worries about that,
Yeah, I totally hear you. And I think it's how you introduce those mechanics, and you have to. There's a fine line with creating addicting behaviors that are not additive. But when there's a financial, building personal wealth, if they're, that does solve a real problem. I think. But back to the content, the content theme. There is going to be, we believe that as AI intersects with game development and truly enhances, makes it more efficient, lower cost, whatever it might be, vibe coding and some of the emerging AI platforms, there's going to be a saturation of content, we believe. And the breakthrough at that point really is about distribution, which is not unfamiliar. But that's why it's part of our core theses is to, invest in founders or kind of emerging tech that kind of solves that distribution problem. If our hypothesis is true that there is going to be an oversaturation of content, most folks, whether they know it or not, can launch. It might not be the best game, but developing games is somewhat, the barrier to entry is getting lower and lower every month.
Totally. I just had a founder the other day telling me about generative gaming, and I can't remember the article he sent me, but it's on Twitter, of these guys playing Doom, and I Doom, that one I remember Doom, right? Like that was a fun game growing up, and but it was the entire world was generative AI.
Yeah.
That blows my mind. Can you imagine that? Like there's no dev, and it was streaming generative AI. What? I honestly, I can't even believe that. And so, yeah, you're right. It's all about distribution and user acquisition at that point. That's it. That's the whole moat. In like community. And so, I mean, again, this is like honestly the number one reason why I built my podcast, because I realized, about 6 years ago that owning my own distribution was super important.
Yeah.
And that's why I invest so much time and energy in it. We just haven't shipped any products, so that's
Yeah.
not happen. Yeah, something soon, hopefully. So tell me like what you guys are seeing on the AI front. Like, have you guys played any of these generative games, or have you looked into the generative gaming space at all?
We have, I mean, so our thesis is like fairly broad. We do look at infra products, anything that enhances or makes game development more efficient, specifically, as it relates to Web3. But we're also looking well beyond just Web3. I mean, there's some pretty incredible, powerful products that even, I swear they didn't exist 6 months ago.
Like, give me some examples.
Well, there's some examples that we can't necessarily share just yet, but I'm sure you're probably familiar with, some of the like Cursor or Windsurf or some of those other ones.
I'm using Codex. I mean, I vibe coded the prototype for my Snake game, which I called Snek. But how that one there is.
Yeah.
I'm serious. I vibe coded Snek with Codex.
How long did it take you to do that?
Now, after I've actually made a couple different applications with this. So I think Snek took me maybe like 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just kept like, you have to figure out how to do the prompts and the workflow. I vibe coded a landing page for this product we're launching around agentic payments at my other company, ABK Labs. And I vibe coded the entire landing page in a day. And that's after it did everything: branding, soup to nuts, naming, everything, logo, all of it. And then I built a viral referral marketing feature into it. So after you opt in, it gives you a referral link that tracks everything. And it even has like fraud protection, like basic fraud protection. And the reason I knew what to prompt is because I actually built in Rails, Ruby on Rails, maybe 15 years ago with my partner, Brian, an API business that was just for adding that feature. And I probably spent a year building that business. And I mean, look, I'm a terrible engineer. I'm not an engineer. Okay. Like, I had no business writing software back then, but I was just starting out. And it was like the only way to go get it done was like teach myself how to code until I found my partner, Brian. And, but regardless, even when I had him and his team building it, it still took a long time for us to build that product. I vibe coded that feature into my app in less than 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And it just worked.
Wow. Yeah.
Like, it just worked. It was a complicated referral marketing feature. And I tested it. I'll share the link with you guys afterwards, and you can just refer each other, and you'll see like there's a leaderboard and it tracks everything. There's a dashboard on the back end that tracks clicks. I can track every click from every URL that gets sent out per user and see not only like how many referrals they're getting, but the conversion rates from how much they're sharing and how many clicks they get, and how many of those clicks actually turn into actual signups.
Yeah.
This is all just custom built. So and that was with Codex and GPT. So yeah, really, really cool.
What's really fun about like the chaotic evolution of AI is in relations to venture, at least, and seeing founders like experiment for the venture side. It's like, when you talk to a lot of VCs, it's like they have a lot of data to draw upon from like previous, eras or cycles, or just like watching product grow in whatever specific category. But AI seems to be evolving so fast that everybody's revisiting the thesis every like 3 to 6 months, which means there's a lot of opportunity, right? But it's like to get that 1,000 or 10,000x supporting the right teams, you have to be pretty imaginative and ballsy. And then when I'm watching like founders, like let's take one category, right? And Rick, you and I were chatting about this for a specific portco that's building this for themselves as a studio. They're trying to build a real asset pipeline where they don't have to like spend hours with their 3D artists and stuff like that making 3D assets. But there's like no tooling out there that's mainstream yet that anybody's kind of figured to make the process super easy for 3D. Getting the bump mapping right, getting like the texture, getting like the exact like styling, It's like more work just to get one asset done than to like just do it manually right now, unless someone out there has a reference to a startup we don't know about. But you see them trying it, and then you see like Unity and like all the like Unreal Engine, all these guys buying up startups trying to figure out the same thing. And then you see like, publishers investing into this as well. And it's like, what's going to come out of it, right? Most likely they'll be able to solve it, but what else is going to come out of that research and development? And how is that going to change over time rapidly is super excited to see.
I think the real alpha right now is that you're going to see more and more full stack AI applications, and they're going to be built on crypto rails. So my thesis is open source. I call it open intelligence. So that's open source AGI or ASI and crypto rails. And I think it's existential that it actually exists, because without it, you're left with Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Sam Altman, and then, Google and Facebook, and then the U.S. government and China that had AGI, right, or ASI at some point. And then we're all just kind of left in the wind without like a version of that we can control or have even participation in financially or in any kind of ownership. And so I think what's going to happen is there's this like factory system for creating ASI that has all these inputs and outputs and different protocols and infrastructure that need to exist. And all that stuff is getting built. And I think what you're talking about is an example of out of that is going to come some of that infrastructure that helps us accelerate to open intelligence, to actual real open intelligence. And I think it's going to be something we haven't seen before. It's something we might not think of. And it might be, maybe it's a game, like maybe there's this like generative AI game that like drives a bunch of the infrastructure that needs to be built to create ASI. I don't know. Open intelligence, open source AGI or ASI and crypto rails. So that's kind of the thing that I'm searching for. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space. I also think in the near term, next 6 to 12 months, you're going to see like dozens of stories like we saw yesterday with this Israeli startup. I can't remember their name, but there's this Israeli startup that got bought by Wix for $80 million 6 months after they started. And granted, that founder, they had 8 people working there. That founder, and the TechCrunch article was really misleading. It's kind of a fluff piece. It was like single founder, like sells his company, his AI thing, in 6 months, but he wasn't really a single founder. And they tell you that like in the first paragraph, you're like, come on, man. But still, he built this like vibe coding app, BigSpot, and did it with very little resources. And they went in 6 months from 0 to 160,000 profit per month. And then you're seeing stuff like what's happened on Solana in the last year, where you're getting like pumped up fun, fastest revenue growing application probably of all time. Like they hit something like, what was it, 700 million in revenue the first year. This is how we get to open intelligence. There's some mechanic here that's going to work, that's going to actually create, or maybe like multiple pieces of infrastructure that have these kinds of mechanics that are going to allow us to catch up. That's the only way I see us catching up, though, because how else do you compete with, a guy who can pour 100 billion into, these massive gigawatt data centers? You just can't.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you brought up a good point. I think what we also, so I think that, given how fast these platforms are almost enabling, it's kind of democratizing access to entrepreneurship. It's creating this window of opportunity where anyone, regardless of their like technical proficiency, can turn ideas into action. And so, my hope is that we have this new wave of innovators that have very limited, even funding or technical ability, but might have really great ideas. And I imagine that, so I don't know what that looks like at scale. Maybe it goes back to distribution again, because even if there's a suite or a massive like collection of great products being launched every month, distribution, are there enough users?
But it's all go to market. Everything is go to market. It's not technology anymore. Technology, unless you're doing cutting edge cryptography or AI research, like building a new LLM or something, then distribution is really the only thing that matters. It's all go to market. And And that's hard to do. And if you're, I really feel like for people like me, I've got like some technical skills. I've written applications in the past, even though I'm not a good engineer. I feel like it gives me superpowers because I've got good distribution skills, good sales skills, good marketing skills, have an audience. And now I've got like codecs. It's kind of blowing my mind. The trick is for people like me is staying focused. You get the, because I think that's actually the real problem. Once you have all the other pieces that we're talking about, because when you're an ideas person and you have so much creativity and so much potential at your fingertips to just ship stuff, it's addicting to just ship it. And then you ship one and you ship the next one, or you ship the next one. And that's the thing that I'm conscious of. You can't just keep shipping like all this random stuff. You have to like pick strategies, see them through to failure or to growth. And then you can have more ideas.
Yeah. Focus and conviction. But at least you'll be able to ship quickly, fail quickly. The ability to rapid prototyping is at your fingertips now. So
right. Yep. So how far are we here? I gotta check the time here. I want this part out. Let's see. I can't even see it. Okay, cool. So we're at the top of the show, and I always ask this at the end. What have I not asked you that I should have asked or that you wanted to talk about?
That's like the hardest question.
Yes. That's the point.
Man. I'm gonna use this to alley-oop to you, Rick.
Okay.
But I think we're doing some pretty incredible things, not from just an investment perspective. It's like what happens afterwards, right? And that is like a huge value add for anybody working within the Arbitrum ecosystem. And I think Rick does a really good job illustrating that like platform that will support our builders.
Yeah. Let me just like think about the best way to articulate this. I've never had to do it on the spot. It usually just comes. But I'll say this. I'll start with this. Is when I was building my last startup, we organically chose Arbitrum. It wasn't because of a grant or a some type of investment. We evaluated multiple different solutions, and we organically chose Arbitrum because it was the right technology. It was the only choice that would enable the end user experience that we're hoping to provide. Supervision aligned, and we chose Arbitrum because, to be honest, it was everyone that we had met there was really about development and technology, almost an academic approach. But it just felt really mature. And there's obviously the technical benefits and liquidity benefits, et cetera. But we've realized that, not every team or project makes that choice organically, or they may not know how to assess or make the appropriate decision when choosing a chain, or in this case, Arbitrum. And so, upon joining, I realized that there's some of the more prominent founders in Arbitrum made that decision the exact same way. And so there's something really magical about that. There's a reason, the reason to believe just naturally exists. But it's not just about that, because once we invest in a company, every company has a unique set of pain points, friction, unmet needs, maybe various levels of like Web3 proficiency. And so how do we support them? Knowing that there's like several different personas of founders. And so we're in the process and we've gotten pretty far along, but we're calling it Project Easy Mode. But it's essentially our approach to venture platform and identifying what matters most to developers across, let's say, 3 personas. I think it ultimately comes down to making a brand promise. When the time comes, we want to be able to kind of celebrate these support systems, whether it's technical resources, it might be bringing in third-party services, or just folks within our team, or even off-chain labs. But we realize that that bottoms-up approach hasn't necessarily been taken in this space, and especially in unconventional format that we're in, because we're not an ecosystem fund. We're not corp venture, but we're also not a private equity firm or a traditional VC. So that unconventionality, how do we embrace that? Well, we can be flexible. We can adapt to the needs of the founders that we invest in. And so soon, we're going to be, kind of communicating this externally, and extending that brand promise that we can actually keep. And so, recognizing that there's even a new vintage of founders coming in, that have crossed the chasm. They're willing to experiment in Web3 in a way that they just weren't willing to, a couple of years ago. And we want to be the home for those folks, as well as indie developers. And so, I think that venture platform is, it's a bit of an art and science, but it all comes down to our target audience, which are the most innovative founders. And I'm pretty excited about it. It's a little bit early to share exactly what the details are, but, mapping out a developer journey, it's, we always say this: swim deeply and solve acutely. And right now we're kind of in the deep end, still swimming. But soon I think we'll be able to share a lot more about that.
Very cool. Well, when you guys are ready, we'll have to have you back on and talk about it.
Oh, maybe you can be, maybe timing wise, it'll work well for your, what are you going to call your, game or publisher or whatever you're thinking?
Well, Index Studios is the studio, the media company that owns the podcast. So Index Studios, and then we'll have a bunch of games underneath it. We might do JVs with other people. We're kind of figuring that out. Snack.
Yes.
Snack might come. I thought Snack was funny, and it makes for a nice token $sign, $sign Snack. Not that we would do a token. But yeah, I don't know yet. We'll have to figure that out. Maybe you guys can help me figure that out.
We should definitely sync on the product side. It seems like you've got some interesting ideas.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
This is awesome.
Thank you, Alex. It's great, man. Really appreciate it.
Bye.